I'm in a hallway with two other teachers that move at the same time. Closest to door X goes first. The teacher's watching the hallway that would go next, and then brings their kids out and so forth to limit how many people are lined up in the hallway at one time.
Oh, I really like that idea. So essentially, we will, and maybe group weigh in on this. What do you think about April's idea in terms of a rolling dismissal? And I wonder if we can do that also while we're changing classes. What do you all think about that?
I think you would take some logistics with each hallway within each given school, but if we put a recommendation that the administration works on that, I think that can be worked out. Again, knowing that we're going to reduce the instructional time and that making sure the teachers and the admin know that ahead of time. That's the expectation that's going to happen.
At an elementary level, that's not going to be an issue, but when you're looking at the middle and high school level, that is going to be very problematic.
You want to talk about it some more, Chris?
Sure. I mean, I've been at a school that decided, it was Denison to be specific, so that I'm not just throwing out schools here, that decided that we needed to, because there was such discipline issues and there were so many fights in the halls, that we would rotate based on grade level. So all sixth grade would go. Once sixth grade was supposed to be in their class, then seventh grade would get dismissed, then eighth grade. But what ended up happening is that sixth grade got punished by losing classroom teaching time, because of the fact that when we got to the end of the school day, their class time got cut down. And at the beginning of the school day, their class time was extended because they were the last ones to go. So first period lasted for them an extra 15 minutes, but their last period was 15 minutes short because of the amount of time that it would take for doing that class change of different times. Then we also had the issue of kids, they still wanted to be able to either hang out with their friends at another grade level, or they still wanted to cause the fight. And so they would hide in a restroom or find some place to hide on campus. And so it became very problematic. And it didn't last very long that we ended up doing that because it was so problematic.
Okay, those are good points and good perspectives. I think one of the things that we'll obviously have to work out is once we make the recommendation, then it's up, in my mind, then it will be up to administrators to kind of implement it and trying to figure that out. April and Jenny, I see both of your hands raised. No? Okay. So right now, the recommendation that is on the table is essentially we do a rolling dismissal. And remember, during our last meeting, we also talked about block scheduling. And so this is, again, for secondary. But if we did block scheduling with a rolling dismissal, do you all think that that is something that is feasible, that can be done? Absent the hiccups that Chris shared, we know that there are going to be some glitches in the system. But overall, is that something that you as a committee would like to make as a recommendation?
If I may, a lot of middle schools tend to put their grade levels all together. They'll put it by floor. For instance, when I was at Denison, seventh grade was on the second floor, sixth grade was on the first floor as much as possible. Over at Standby, where I'm at now, the Willis building is the sixth graders, the eighth graders are on the top floor, the seventh graders are on the bottom floor of the main building. When I was at Lake Marion Creek, they each had their own buildings and floors. And so therefore, they kind of keep them together as it is. So you're still faced with the dilemma of if you release all of sixth grade at one time, they're all still in the same area. So that would require, based on what you're saying, to keep them socially distanced, we would have to move them throughout the school to keep them as far apart as possible, if you see what I'm saying.
That makes sense. And originally, I think, and I just expanded April's suggestion because I thought April was only suggesting, and maybe you can pipe in, April, but I thought April was only suggesting that we do the rolling dismissals at the end of the day. I thought it would be good if we had the rolling dismissals throughout the day to limit the amount of people or to limit the amount of students in the hallways. And so if it can't be done logistically, that's fine. But maybe April, can you give us some clarity on what your true suggestion was, so we as a team can make sure that we submit that as a recommendation?
I was
It was
speaking
just,
as throughout the day. For
oh,
instance, when there
okay.
when a grade level was going to PE or to art and music at the same time in the same window, and but they're in the same hallway, that the teachers work to um, arrange that I'm going first, then once we're out, you come behind, and so forth. As well, at the end of the day, that might be a need too. In the smaller schools, that would be, I think, easily accommodated. But in the bigger schools, Chris is right, that's going to be problematic. But it's nothing that I don't think people could work through. It's just going to take, here's your recommendation, and then let the administrators figure out how they're going to make that work.
Okay. And we have two comments. Mrs. Fortney said essentially that they don't follow rules in middle school on a good day. And then she also said, plus at SMS, we tried, ended up with kids unsupervised because of mixed classes and grade levels. And then Jenny has just piped in and said, I think this is going to be very unique to the individual school and their administrators. They know their buildings best. I would agree with all of those. I think again, all we're doing is making recommendations. And so if the administrators choose to follow the recommendations, and then they can work out the logistics of their school, because, as Ms. Fortney said, they know SMS best. And Chris, you're currently at standby, so I can't use you. But let's say Jenny's at, where are you? Gibbon Street. And so, or not Gibbon Street, I'm sorry, you're at Griffin. And so Jenny knows Griffin, and Melissa Durrance knows Griffin best. So I think this would be a good recommendation for all of us just to make to the overall group, and then to let the administrators kind of decide it from there. And so so Chris just said, I think the idea we are discussing is good for elementary. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and parse it out. So first part is having grade levels in the hallways, or having rolling dismissals for grade levels. So does everybody agree with that recommendation from the group? Is that where we are right now? So I have one yes from Steve. Can you just, if you can type, just put agreed in the meeting, so in the chat box, so we'll know that we're all agreeing to this. And so again, the recommendation is for elementary, we do dismissals based on the rolling dismissals based on grade level, etc. And so that may have to be tweaked a bit, but again, this is just for elementary, if we think about it. And it's also in an effort to reduce the amount of students in the hall. Okay. And so the second part of that is now for
Excuse me,
6 to 12.
Excuse me, Ms. Tedra.
Yes.
The first recommendation is going to be for rolling dismissals based on grade level. Is that going to be rolling dismissals throughout the day?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Based on grade level, yes. Okay, and then the second part is, what about rolling dismissals, or how are we going to, let's think about it. So remember, if we go back to our last meeting, we had block scheduling for 6 through 12, or the recommendation for us is block scheduling for 6 through 12. And so that's already going to reduce the amount of people in the hall, because they're not going to be interacting as much with each other in the hallway. And then if we take it a step further, what else can we think about in the hallway that would reduce one, contact with each other, or two, space? Are there any suggestions there? John? John, you have your hand up?
You're muted.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. So the alternating day block schedule will reduce the frequency of movement, but it will not necessarily reduce the amount of students at any given on one time during a class change. So while we're reducing the frequency, we're not necessarily reducing the amount of students. So just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that one. And I think one of the best things that we can do, or I think Jenny said it, is when our regionals meet with our principals, submitting a traffic plan. How are you going to move your students around campus, and utilizing some of the recommendations that we make. I really like the one-way path for the elementary. I was trying to think through it logistically in my mind for high school and or middle school. So I'm interested to hear some of the ways that we can kind of reduce and try to keep the social distancing during class change for secondary. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was the question on the table, essentially, is what are some of the things that we think we can recommend? And I think I'm seeing a lot of movement in the chat room. Hold on for 1 second. Let me just catch up with everyone. So besides the agreeing, Larry Milhorn said, I think every school should come up with their own plan from our recommendations. Larry, I really agree with you wholeheartedly there. I believe that that is the intent of what we're doing now. So good suggestion there. April Sumner said meals in classroom delivered by lunch staff. Oh, I like that idea. I think we'll have to work on that logistically, but I really like that idea. And so if we could just hold that thought, we're going to get to lunch in a second. And then Victor Duncan said we need to discuss social distancing for student arrival from the time they come on campus and the time they go to class, and also during dismissal of the day. Agreed, Victor. That's what we're trying to figure out now. So essentially, the question that's on the table is in the hallways. What in the hallways for secondary students? So again, 6th graders through 12th graders. Do we have any ideas, any thoughts, any suggestions about ways to reduce, to one, have social distancing in the hallways when they're changing classes, and then 2, ways to reduce the amount of students in the classrooms. I'm sorry, in the hallways. And then Sarah Fortney just said indoors and outdoors. Oh, I like that. That's a good idea. So anything else? For social distancing in the hallways with secondary? Everyone's very quiet. I'm not used to this. You all are a very talkative group.
Tedra, I got
Yes.
The social distancing in the hallways is going to be a problem. The schools, when I service the school and they change classes, I mean, all the kids seem to run to, like everybody said, their friends and all. I think the biggest thing we need to make sure is masks are worn. There's some kind of repercussions if they're not wearing their mask while they're in the hallways, for one thing. In the classroom might be a little different, but in the hallways, we need to find a way to make sure that the masks are worn in the hallways. That I don't see really a good way to stop the kids, because kids are creative. They'll find ways to get to each other one way or the other. They're going to do it. And I think that we need to focus a lot on really making it safe with masks and all, because anybody that's ever been in a school, especially a high school, when classes change, even the middle school, the kids will find a way to get to each other. Sooner or later, they will do that. And the teachers and administration, they have a hard time as it is doing the rules we now have in these schools to start putting on more things and trying to keep the kids apart, because I don't think we're ever going to do that, no matter what we do.
You know, you bring up a really good point. I don't know if it's really practical, right? If it's something that we can enforce. What if the recommendation is, and this is just me just kind of thinking, what if we have like almost infomercials, maybe like right before the bell rings, something comes on a TV or it comes on a screen that says, please remember to practice social distancing in the hallway. And maybe that's all we can do for secondary, because like you said, they like to congregate. I remember when I was in 6th grade, I ran to my friends during the bell changes, right? Because that's when I got to see my friends, and obviously it was a different time, but that may be something that we just ask them to do rather than trying to monitor it. And we more so monitor the masks rather than the social distancing. I have a whole lot of comments here. So let me just read the comments and then we can go. I see a number of hands raised. So hold on for 1 second. So Linda said that she agrees that traffic plans are a good idea. Yes, I really like that idea as well, Linda. Chris said, April, that would have to be negotiated to by PEA because teachers are entitled to a duty-free lunch. Correct. Yes. So everything that we would do that would affect the teacher, Chris, would be negotiated with PEA, and we'll have to sign some sort of MOU with them, knowing that, you know, we are kind of in different times. But we would, of course, negotiate it with PEA, and not only with PEA, with AFSCME as well. We're asking everybody to be a bit more flexible with their duties. Sarah Fortney said it's just hard at a secondary level. Visualize RHS. Yes. So Ridge, that's the school I was thinking about in terms of trying to social distance 3,000 students at one time. I don't know how that's going to happen. So that would be very difficult. That's a very, very good point, Ms. Fortney. Thank you. Sheila Keith, do they use lockers anymore? Because if so, they won't be able to use lockers. They need clear backpacks. I don't know. I'm not, so who's our resident high school person? John, do they use lockers anymore? Just a yes or no. So we lost John.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So in most schools, they issue them only to students that want them. So they're not they're not used extensively is the best way of saying it, to my knowledge. Now that may have changed. I've been in the school for 2 years, so, but I think they're minimal. Many times it's minimal use.
All right, thank you. So to Sheila's point, then Sheila, I don't know if that will be an issue based on the minimal usage, but we can definitely see, and that may be something that we can recommend is the use of clear backpacks as well.
I said this, Ms. Porteous, because I think that if they are using them, they shouldn't be able to, which will prevent traffic from being so heavy and things like that, you know.
That makes sense. I think that's a good point. Thank you. I appreciate it. So the next one is from Jenny Siren. Jenny said, I realize this is going to be a challenge to socially distance, but we are working in different times. Is the district thinking about making videos, or do we already have them to help train students? I think we're going to make, I'm sorry, go ahead. Hello? Okay. Steve, you unmuted yourself, so I'm going to mute you again. So Jenny, I think go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think I took care of the feedback problem. Well, one, I wanted to say, you know, the social distancing is going to be a huge issue at the middle and the high school. And we can lay out plans, but there are going to be a lot of kids that violate that. And I think that that is something that we're probably going to have to realize, that kids are going to be kids, and that's going to happen. You know, that's why it's going to be very important for us, you know, to focus on the kids wearing masks at all times, because that's going to be the one thing that we can ensure that they do. But on your question about a program to let the kids know that, you know, times have changed and this is how school is going to work now. I did approach Rachel's office about starting a campaign to get kids to think about how school is going to operate now, how things are going to look, and you know, to let them know that this is about not just protecting themselves and their students, but their teachers, their parents, and their grandparents. So you know, that's being worked on, and you know, that is going to be I think our best way to go, which is to have a campaign about this is how school is going to look now. That's all.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone else have any comments based on what Steve and Jenny have stated? I agree. I think that it's a good strategy to have something like that in place. And like Jenny said, let's do it sooner. And setting the expectation early is going to be essential for elementary, middle, and high school. And so she further said, it's not to say that we won't have issues, but we could take preventative measures and keep consistent with our new expectations with students. I agree. I think those are really good suggestions if we do it early. And it goes back to the video. If we do the video right before we change classes and just make students aware, along with the masks, and mandate the masks more so than the social distancing. So I'm going to switch over you all and let you all talk. I see a number of hands raised. So hold on for 1 second. Mr. Hill, I think your hand is raised, and then Chris, yours is after him.
I apologize. I forgot to take it down.
Okay. Hand is unraised now. Chris?
This would be more of a question for the administrators to be able to answer at the secondary level, who have to deal with master schedule. But if we're going to be going to a block scheduling, what would the possibility be of having a group of students in a classroom for block, keeping them there and have the teacher rotate to the next classroom? I realize with electives, getting the kids out to go do their elective could be problematic. But if we were able to somehow work a master schedule so that the kids stay in that class basically for the majority of the day, how administrators, those of you who are admin, is that something that's feasible from your knowledge base?
Steve,
Yeah,
because you're driving.
I was going to say that at the high school level, that would be problematic because the kids are all they all go to different classes, so you can't just keep them all in one room from that. So at the high school level, that would be practically impossible.
If I say that wouldn't be a bad idea though for elementary, that departmentalize.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would work best at elementary. It does become more complex and problematic at the high school level, certainly the secondary level. But it's something you could play with and look at and see. But I do think it would be very complex at the high school level for sure.
Well, I know like at middle school, they all have to take 6th grade language arts. They all have to take world history. They all have to take 6th grade math. And when you get to 7th grade, same thing. They're all taking basically the same subjects because I, as a teacher, teach the same thing 7 times a day. And so I'm just curious, I guess maybe it is more a middle school thing. Is there any middle school administrators on here that could say whether this would be something that would be feasible? Because we might have to have, like Tedra said, different levels that we're making different recommendations. And so we've got the elementary one, maybe we have to have a middle and maybe we have to have a high.
Yeah, I cut my teeth in middle school and was APC there at Stanbaugh. So I think it's definitely, I can recall going from middle to high, and the complexity in the master scheduling is significant. So I think you do have a greater possibility of trying to do something like that at a middle level as opposed to a high school. So we could probably pull a few of our middle school APCs and ask them logistically to think through that and to see what those possibilities are.
All right, everyone. Good thoughts and good suggestions. So basically, what I'm hearing is at the secondary level, again, we're going to enforce masks. We're going to communicate, maybe do a video before they change classes. We'll work with PR, and Steve is already working with PR to get some of that done. Mrs. Fortney, you have your hand raised?
I do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, all these are really great ideas, but just, I just want to, Tedra, you know me, I'm all about consistency. And if we're not all consistent at every school-based site, I know exactly what will happen. I have a parent that I teach the kid. The kid also has an older brother that goes to a different school. They don't make us do it there. I just think, you know, that reducing the flow in the hall is a goal, but they're not going to be social distanced in the classrooms anyways. I mean, you know, there's no way we can afford to get, I mean, we had biology classes with 37 in it, you know, uh, realistic. I'm just trying to be realistic. So our goal moving them from one place to another is just minimize that, I would think, because they're not going to be social distance and do smart things like, you know, you can only exit this door, enter this side of the building, inside the self-contained buildings like Stanball or Denison. Uh, Most of those, you know, those are principal decisions, but you know, you look at Ridge, there, I just don't see a way humanly possible. You know, that's just me. The infomercials, you know, I have to go to Lowe's occasionally. People could no more care about all that than a man on the moon, but they keep putting it out there. And again, it's about being consistent. You know, one school, you have to have everybody wears the mask, kind of like cell phones. You know, you got a teacher that lets them use cell phones, one that doesn't let them use cell phones, one that lets them charge cell phones, one that doesn't let them charge cell phones. That's what worries me the most. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all really, really good points. And Mr. Davis, you have your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Jeffrey, and I'm Davis. I work with transportation. I agree with Miss Sarah because I can tell you from being a transportation manager, when these angels get to these schools, some of our schools don't even have people out there to receive the students. And then some of our schools, like Boone Middle School, they do an excellent job. They come to the bus, they unload the students, they make sure they have their IDs, and they make them go in a certain directions. But some of our schools, especially some schools, and I'm not going to call a name, there's no one even out there in the loading zone to receive these angels when they get off these buses in the morning.
That's a really, really good point in terms of the consistency, and you're really emphasizing what Mrs. Fortney has told us that we really need to think about in terms of just making sure that we put out, and here's my thing, I think we need to put out very practical, very realistic, and very easy to follow recommendations. And no, they may not always be followed, but overall, our expectation, particularly from our administrators, is that they follow the recommendations that we provide, because it's what we're trying to do is keep everybody safe. And Mrs. Fortney, I think to your point, what Ridge does and what, let's say, Stevens Elementary does will be totally and completely different. But at least if we put out practical recommendations, we can let them do what they need to do within their buildings. And that may be different, but at least it's based on the recommendations that we've provided. Anyone else has their hand raised?
Tedra?
Steve? Yep.
Yeah, and not to go over again, sort of what I said before, but it kind of dawned on me that, you know, what we want to do is promote social distancing by doing things like lining hallways and trying to have traffic go one way on one side and another way on the other side, and by block scheduling and by trying staggered releases. Those things will all promote social distancing. But as can we actually enforce it? Because if we make it, this is, you know, if you're not 6 feet apart, then it might become a discipline issue. So I think what we're talking about is promoting social distancing, but our line is everybody wears a mask. That's our number one. We're not promoting that. We're saying this is what you have to do to be in a brick and mortar school this school year. So we say mask for everybody. We promote social distancing, and that's going to look different at every school, because every school has different populations, different needs, different setups at their school. So that part we're going to have to get used to. What's it look like at each school? It's going to look a little different. But we set up these things, I think, exactly what you said. We give out broad recommendations on social distancing and then let the principals put those in place that work for their school.
Anyone else on this issue?
Yes, Tedder, I just wanted, I put a little thing in the comment side. I used to tell my kids all the time, keep it simple, students, the KISS method. That's what we need to do. We need to
Right.
keep it simple and enforceable. And
Agreed.
okay, that was it. I just want to make sure you saw it.
Okay, yeah, I'm toggling back and forth. I apologize, between the chats and the people and everything. So, so the recommendation that's on the table is, one, we keep it simple. We make the recommendation for social distancing, and we do the videos to show social distancing before we do class changes. Does everyone agree to that? And if so, just go ahead and type agreed in the chat box. Steve, you don't type agreed, you drive. I don't want it to be a liability on the district. Okay, so just so we're clear, when students, we're recommending 1 block scheduling, the social distancing videos, masks for all, temperature checks for all, and then in the hallways, we're also recommending the rolling dismissal for elementary if we can. I think that can be a recommendation actually across the board, and then let the administrator decide what that means to them.
Tedra, does the Department of Health already have infomercials?
Come answer this, Teresa.
Hold on, Jeffrey, you're not muted. I'm going to mute you. Okay,
Sorry.
go ahead. No worries. Go ahead, Sarah. I can't hear you.
Yeah, Tedra, does the CDC or the health department already have some kind of infomercial we could just use, like already made, so that we're all on the same page, like washing hands and...
I'm sure they do. This is just me, and so I would prefer maybe if our own department did it, because then we can get our students involved. You know, we can have them there washing their hands and smiling into the camera, you know.
Yeah,
like
I agree, but maybe we could rip off some of their stuff. You know?
in terms of the ideas. Okay, that's a good point. So yes, I think so. Or we can let's think about it, and maybe, but yes, I think we can have the information that they've already published. I think we can use the information that they've already published and then put it in one of our videos. Okay, so now let's move on. How do we feel about students moving through the halls? Is there anything else, y'all, that we need to talk about? Students moving through the halls? Nothing else with students moving through the halls. Okay, so now the next thing on our agenda is when students and staff utilize classroom space. Woo, this is a big one. So let's think about that. When students and staff utilize classroom space. And so I don't know if our CFO is on, Mr. Perrone, but I think this is going to be a bit difficult because our classes aren't designed for social distancing, number one. Number two, with the amount of students in the classroom, if we just use the previous example that Mrs. Fortney talked about, she said there are 37 students in the classroom in a science class. If we use that, I don't know how we will be able to socially distance in the classroom, if at all. Do you all have any thoughts or suggestions or ideas on that you'd like to share with our whole group? Neither is the curriculum, Mrs. Fortney says. Okay, do you all have any thoughts or ideas that you would like to share? Social distancing in the classroom?
I
Chris,
am on,
laughing
Tedra.
at me? I'm sorry?
I am on, but I have.
Okay.
Well, Tedra, I'll just tell you, it's going to be financially and physically, in my humble opinion, totally impossible, which is why I was talking about moving from the class that's not socially distanced to worrying about a hallway that is, that kind of thing. I mean, we don't have it. I mean, that's why I think we need to press the mask and the shields.
Hi, Tedra. This is Michelle. I am just had a chance to chime in on your meeting this morning, and I can share a little bit of the recommendations that we've talked about in the instructional group.
Okay.
Because this does kind of impact, this is an area where we cross over, but you know, certainly we could recommend that desks are separated when feasible. But if they, we saw some research where if they can't be separated, then you would have students at least face the same direction. So that would kind of minimize, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, the direction in which they are breathing. But we know, like, when we typically have kids sitting in cluster groups where they work with one another and partners, we may have to think differently about that type of collaboration, unfortunately, during this time. And then I know you guys just mentioned block scheduling, but we also talked about just cohorting groups of students where possible for like lunch or recess or any activities. And then discontinue activities that have large groups. And then, of course, frequent hand washing and hand sanitation that you brought up. But we also had a note about limiting the sharing of personal items. Sometimes we know there's community cups for pencils and things of that nature, but that really we need to be mindful of kids using their own writing utensils, manipulatives, etc. And then lockers came up in our group too, and we were leaning towards just not using them during this school year, especially that also created a concern when schools had to close down quickly and students having to retrieve their items. So perhaps if they didn't use lockers, then that would minimize that. So that, just in those veins, that's kind of how that came up in the instructional group.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Anyone else have anything that they'd like to share or have any comments based on what Michelle has shared with the group from her from her instructional group? Sorry.
Ms. Tedra,
Yes, ma'am.
based on Ms. Michelle's recommendations from the instructional group, one of them, I think she noted no large gatherings. How's that going to work for music, specials, PE, art? Will they, in my mind, sometimes like PE goes twice a week, right? Maybe at elementary level, maybe we can limit it by only in elementary, PE only goes once a week now. And maybe one grade level so that they will have the possibility of social distancing. Or how would that work?
We weren't, just to clarify, we weren't really talking about classes like art, music, and PE. And actually, even at the elementary level, students are required to have 150 minutes of PE every week. And so that kind of inhibits our class sizes as well. But we were thinking more about just assemblies or pep rallies, that we would not recommend having those types of large groups. Or, you know, you've sold cookie dough and you get to go to the party. Those types of things we're going to have to think differently about.
Thank you, Ms. Townley, for the clarification.
Yes, that I'll make sure that I write that a little more clearly. Thanks.
No problem. I'm just taking notes. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Chris, you have a comment?
I honestly don't know how feasible this is because I haven't studied the plan in depth, but I have a friend up in Ohio who published what her school district is doing. And basically what they have decided to do in their district is they are shutting down high school for brick and mortar, and they will be all distance learning. And then they're taking the middle school kids and moving them up to the high school so that they can be more spread out, since typically middle schools are not as condensed. And then taking the elementaries and spreading them between the elementary and the middle schools so that you've got a smaller population. I know that would be a huge endeavor for us here in Polk County, but we're looking at all possibilities and we're brainstorming all possible ideas. So that is a possibility as well that we could throw into the mix.
Okay, so how do you all feel about that? Is that a recommendation that we want to discuss right now? Essentially, because we're talking about utilization of classroom space. And so I think to Chris's point is that if we make the recommendation that we have as many virtual options as we can, and then that would free up some additional classroom space because people won't be there, and then we can better socially distance. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions about that?
Tedra, I'm just wondering, with the directive from the governor and DOE to offer some sort of face-to-face, they haven't differentiated that K-12. So I think we would be required to open our high schools. So I get in theory what they're doing in Ohio to free up space, but I don't think in Florida we've been given that flexibility at this time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would agree with you on that. I was thinking, I guess I was taking the Ohio idea and applying it to Florida, meaning what if we recommend, or what if we try to have as many high schoolers go virtual, and then that way, or even middle schoolers go virtual, and then that way we can free up the class space from them not being there, and that would allow us to better socially distance. That's what I was thinking.
Gotcha. And we may know more about that after we have students register for their choice.
Okay, and
Since
that's
the
what Mrs.
government,
Courtney just, go ahead.
since the governor is requiring this, even though it says in the options that it's up to the school districts, but if the governor is requiring this, I know that there are districts where if your last name starts A through K, you go on Monday, L through N go on Tuesday. So you're still getting that face-to-face, but the majority of your education is still occurring online, and that would free up space as well.
So I think, to me, I think maybe that suggestion, Chris, would be better for the instructional group in terms of how they're actually facilitating the instruction. My thought process is with this group, it's once they're on campus, what do we do in terms of operationally to help them, right? How do we help them? How do we remind them to wash their hands, to social distance, to wear the masks? What procedures do we have in place that would not ensure, but at least reduce the amount of contact that they have with each other, so that then that would reduce the spread of the virus? Does that make sense?
Then in that case, these two groups are going to cross over, because if we're talking about how to keep as few people in the classroom as possible, this hybrid model of having only certain kids showing up on campus every day because of the lower numbers. I mean, granted, we're going to have parents who are going to be pulling their children completely and they're going to be straight virtual. But even with the remaining kids that will be coming on campus, if we say only 25% of our population is going to be on campus Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for deep clean, then we're meeting the governor's requirement, and we're also having lower numbers, which means the classrooms are smaller, which helps, not helps, let me rephrase that, which makes the social distancing in the classroom completely possible.
So I would agree with you in terms of the crossover, and I think that's why we're all meeting. That's why we're making the recommendations to the large group overall, and then we're seeing how our recommendations will interact with their recommendations as well. So I agree. There's a lot of crossover here. You know, in education, there are very, very few silos, if that makes sense. And it's just because we're all so, one, connected, but then two, we are all so dependent upon each other. So do we have any other suggestions? I think if I'm looking at the chats, hold on for 1 second, Steve, I see your hand. Mrs. Fortney said, we're talking about social distancing in the classroom. The curriculum is not designed for it. Sheila Keith has said, Duval County has a great example of plexiglass for desks. I think I've looked into that, I saw that. And so that is something that I sent to the CFO to look into as well. Mrs. Fortney said state needs to waive certain requirements if they are forcing us to open face-to-face. The registration sign-up could assist with the numbers of the schools. That is true. Hopefully the registration and sign up will assist. Do we have a date certain for the registration? The date was July 10th, but I think now it's a bit more flexible. Michelle, are you still on the call? And is the date, do you know when the date for registration is?
Yes, we're just, we're in the final draft phases of the survey, and then we're just trying to build it out so that we can capture the information from a district-wide perspective as well as sort it out by school. So I think we're going to be ready very soon.
Okay, good. Thank you. And so Mrs. Fortney said, I think as long as the positive cases continue to rise, we could start e-learning for the first 9 weeks. So I think we're looking at everything, Mrs. Fortney, and it really just depends on what direction we get from the state and Florida Department of Education in terms of what our flexibility is. Mrs. Fortney said, please don't call it a survey. And then the next thing is, I know that parents, this is from Chris, I know that parents are holding off on deciding whether to register or not based on our plan. Yeah, we've heard a lot of that in the community. We know that that's happening and going on. And so hopefully we can present our plan sooner than later and make those parents that feel comfortable sending their kids back to school. And then others are just going to, continue with a virtual model. Steve, so you had a question earlier, and then Rob, I see your hand is raised. So let's let Steve comment, and then Rob, you can comment after him. Go ahead.
Yeah, this isn't a total solution to the space problem, but we should encourage principals to look at underutilized spaces for larger classes like the library. And I like the idea of having kids eat lunch in the classroom, because that will certainly help with social distancing, not getting very large groups together. Although I do want to remind everybody that brings other issues in that food is now in the classroom. It's going to be more difficult for the custodians to clean up 70 classrooms as opposed to one cafeteria. So that does bring other issues. But, for social distancing, for larger classes, encourage use of the library or other unutilized large spaces. Encourage teachers to teach some classes outside. If the weather's nice and they can, that can help space out. But, these are all just small solutions to large class problems. It's not going to be a solution to every class.
Agreed. Thank you. And Rob, you had a comment or question?
A comment. We were talking about an A-B schedule or alphabetical order or 25% coming at one time. And at the very beginning, we started talking about, let's say, 50% of the population coming on a Monday and Wednesday, and a 50% coming on Tuesday and Thursday. And then I think we went away from that, and it was either brick and mortar 100% or brick and mortar or the parent's choice to sign up Polk virtual. So I think if the people are waiting on the plan was either they send them back to brick and mortar or they register them for Polk virtual. That's the way I've understood it.
We also,
go ahead.
Yeah, we also have a third option that is part of the virtual piece, which is the e-learning that Ms. Townley and their team have been working on. Just for clarification.
All right, thank you. Okay, so Christy Olson brings up a good point. We need to make sure that we are not infringing on the spaces that are being used by itinerants, such as SLPs and OTs, when looking to utilize space. That's a really good point, Christy. Thank you so much for that. So essentially all options are on the table. But what I'm hearing from you all is we're going to kind of go with the recommendations that Michelle has shared with us, which is if you can, so no cluster groups, one, and then two, if you can have the desks 6 feet apart, go ahead and space them 6 feet apart. And then number 3, if you can face them and have them all facing one direction, that will hopefully utilize some of the transmission. What I heard from Steve as well is utilizing some of the underutilized space. However, we just need to be mindful that we're not infringing on any of the other spaces that are used in the classroom. So I know that was a lot, but do we all agree to those things? So using underutilized space, but making sure we still have dedicated spaces for SLPs and PT and OTs. Is that something that we agree to? Yes, no, maybe? Just type agreed in the chat box for me if you agree to that. The second thing is, what about so we're going to go ahead and kind of defer and go with the recommendations for having the classes utilizing the space in the classrooms, meaning no clusters. I'm imagining single rows all facing one direction. And if we could look at the plexiglass, we'll do that as well. I know that Sheila Keith suggested that. So Sheila will look into that as well. Is that okay? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. And then any other suggestions for when staff and students utilize classroom space? So one of the things that was on the table is cafeteria. And I know that I think April Sumner had put it up earlier, and we had a bit of discussion about it. Let's talk about that, because operationally, that's going to have a major impact on, 1, the flow, but then 2, and more importantly, our students. And so, and then we always must think about staff and the impact of staff as well. And so let's just think about how it will work in terms of students either going to the cafeteria if we're trying to utilize movement, or 2, bringing food. Like, what about a food cart? Not necessarily cafeteria, but what about a food cart or something like that? What do you all think?
Can I jump
Larry?
in?
Good night.
Oh,
It is April.
okay. April and then Larry.
For the delivery of lunches, elementary, that should be feasible. Middle and high, we might want to look at kiosks in different locations to just deliver or disseminate lunches. And also, I wanted just to mention, to put a point to talk about later, custodial services. If the classes are staying in the rooms more than typical, for instance, at my school, the custodian cleans the classrooms when the school class is out for specials. I have no after hours custodian, and I know there are several schools in that kind of situation. That limits the time they can be cleaned. So we need to think about those type of things as well.
That's a good point. Thank you, April. Go ahead, Larry. I think you had your question.
Yeah, we have done feed the kids in the classroom before, and there was major issues with that. First of all, our custodial staff during the day is not that big in schools. When we're feeding them in the classroom, they generate a lot of trash. And like elementary schools, a lot of them have one custodian during the daytime. And it is really hard for that custodian to do other duties. They would have to be relieved of their other duties unless we bring in other people to help them clean up and stuff during feeding in the classrooms. I think feeding in the classrooms probably is a good idea. I'm not sure about the PEA contract on what goes on with teachers about feeding in the classroom like that, because there was issues before when we did that. I just think that if we decide to go this way, which it will probably eliminate the social distancing for the students, I think it's a good idea. But I think we need to look at them things like the custodial staff and all. Do we bring in one of our nighttime custodians to work during the day as long as this COVID is going on, or what do we do to do that? Because it does have a big impact on custodial. I'll tell you, we had that problem when we fed them in the classroom before, and it was really hard for our custodians. And then even the administrators had problems because their custodians don't become available for other things that need to be done in school during the daytime. So we need to look at that before we decide if we're going to feed in the classroom.
Good points. Thank you, Larry. Rob, I see your hand is up.
Yes, talking about the school nutrition staff sending out carts to some of the classrooms, and we are looking at setting up different kiosks so that not everyone's coming into the lunchroom at one time. But we also looked at a plan where maybe, let's say 50% of that lunch group, that lunch period, stays in the cafeteria, and the other 50% go into other areas. And then if they go into classrooms, you know, I don't know if they could go into, let's say, an outside eating area or a some other common area to eat, but then that would eliminate having so many classrooms to clean up. And we're also looking at providing hot meals across the board, even if it's a grab and go. They're looking at providing hot meals. So I just wanted to make those.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. I think that's very important. One of the things when COVID first hit that was really important to Mrs. Bird and just the entire team is to make sure that our students were still fed. And so we know the importance of this, the fact that, one, we're providing hot meals or even thinking about providing hot meals to those students, because let's just face it, guys, this is all that some of them have, you know? And so we need to just be mindful about it and think about it. I'm looking at the chat. I see that one of the questions is, will we hire more custodians? Likely, we're going to have a greater need. Right now, we hire custodians based on the staffing plan. And so that staffing plan did not account for COVID, obviously. And so we'll likely hire more if we have more of a need. And if this is something that this team recommends to the overall group in terms of one, eating in classrooms, having grab and go meals, etc., we will have a greater need for custodians, and then we'll hire more custodians. But Mrs. Fortney did ask Chris about breakfast in classrooms at Standby Middle. And so Chris said that it worked well. And so Chris, I'm sorry, you said it worked okay, but overall it was okay. That's what you said. I'm sorry. So you said it had its challenges, but overall it was okay. I apologize. Can you just discuss that with us a little and tell us how that will work, or how it worked at Standby?
The kids would come in the morning, and there were 1, 2, 3 stations that they could go to get into line to pick up their food. Once they would pick up the food, they would take it to their homeroom classroom, first period classroom. They would eat in the classroom. The teacher was responsible for cleaning up any messes that would occur. They would all have a trash bag, and the kids would put their trash into that trash bag at a certain point. The announcement would come over the intercom that the custodian was starting to come through the hallway to pick up bags. So to make sure you have your trash bag out in the hallway at this point, if you didn't have it out in the hallway at that point, then you were responsible for getting it to the dumpster on your own. When I said that there were challenges, we're talking about social distancing, and the lines for these carts were literally down an entire hallway that would have been at least 200-300 feet long. And then kids would argue and fight over who was in line and cutting in line, typical kid stuff, you know, which would end up leading to discipline issues and fighting issues. And it depends on, to be frank, I hate to say it this way, some teachers have good classroom discipline, others do not. Others just don't have the classroom management skills. And so these kids would get into classrooms with their food, and there would turn into small food fights because the teacher just did not have the control. Of course, it ended up that the teacher and the class would have to clean it up because they were not going to send in a custodian to clean it up. But it would Yes, Sarah, especially on days where there was a substitute in the room, it turned into absolute mayhem because the kids figured they could get away with whatever they would want to get away with. There was more food waste than there was prior because kids figured, I can pick it up. They grabbed what they needed to. They'd sit in the classroom, and the kids who typically wouldn't get breakfast, now they're getting their breakfast. Where these kids that would typically just skip the cafeteria and go straight to their assigned areas to wait for dismissal to first period in previous years, now are grabbing food, and it's just turning into an absolute waste. So you're faced with the dilemma that our food costs will go up. And when we're looking at middle school, there are different options that are put in as available to the kids. You can have the hot lunch, you can have the cold lunch grab and go, you can have a salad. And so if we're going to be delivering this to a classroom, you've got the dilemma of the carts are not going to be big enough to carry all of this from classroom to classroom. And the poor custodial ladies, I'm sure this will be an issue for Larry, is that they're going to be working even 3 times harder, having to not only prepare the food, but they're going to have to be delivering it to classrooms, coming back, picking up the next batch, going to the next set of classrooms, and so on and so forth. So there were pluses, but there were also minuses.
Okay, thank you. Rob, I see your hand is raised. Rob, nope. Okay, Doug, did you have any issues? Did you want to share?
Well, yeah, the only one point that I was going to bring up, we talked, I think, last week about possibly having breakfast in the cafeteria with assigned seats and all that. We have to remember, if we do that, the custodians still got to go back in and clean that space as well. So it's not like if we're going to do breakfast in the cafeteria, that space still has to be cleaned, and then we're going to be doing additional cleaning into the classrooms because of lunches being served in the classroom. So it would be better if we're going to do lunches in the classroom. I think we're probably better off putting breakfast in the classrooms as well. But then again, you have the problem, you have to get trash picked up probably 3 times in the classroom. You have to do after breakfast, after lunch, and then again at the end of the day. It's just extra tasks and labor that we're going to have to come up with to handle the tasks.
Thank you. So one of the things that Rob has suggested and that we've thought about is, his suggestion is we need to use other staff such as drivers and attendants between the morning shift and the afternoon shift. And I'm assuming they can help for lunch and breakfast. Realistically, I think that we're going to have to kind of look at all options in terms of them being on the table and how we make sure or how we ensure that one person or one group of people are not overwhelmed. So we don't want our lunch ladies overwhelmed. And I shouldn't say lunch ladies, our lunch staff or our school nutrition staff. We don't want them overwhelmed, right? We don't want the paras overwhelmed. We don't want our bus overwhelmed. We are in very, very different times, and we just need to think about it. And so it will likely be an all hands on deck in terms of kind of those first few weeks and working out the kinks those first few weeks. But I would agree. I would like to get with Larry at some point and really talk about utilizing other staff. And I think it kind of also depends on the amount of students that we have. So if our student base is lower in terms of the amount of drivers that are now delivering, or not delivering, the amount of drivers for school buses, then maybe I could repurpose some of those people and put them on, like school lunch duty or morning breakfast duty to pass out, to do the carts, so that we still have kind of people, well, we still have our school nutrition staff fixing lunches and doing everything. And then we have another group of people that are passing it out. And then we have another group of people that may be cleaning up, or not necessarily to the same extent that the custodians will wipe and deep clean, but maybe just trash pickup. But those are all things that are kind of the options as of right now. Let me ask you this, as a group, do we agree that we should maybe talk to other staff and have them give them the option of maybe working? So let's say if a bus attendant is not employed, or we don't need that bus route anymore because we don't have the numbers to support it, as a group, do we agree that we should go ahead and talk to other staff and ask them to pick up some other duties? Yes?
I think we're going to need that kind of flexibility. Absolutely.
Okay, and then along those lines, we're still talking about feeding. So I know that we are thinking about like a grab and go, if we do a grab and go with carts. Do we agree to that? Maybe at the secondary level, we do a grab and go with carts, or maybe at the, so I see Chris shaking his head no. So I know that I have one no there. So let's break it down. Let's do two groups. So one, elementary, do we want to do a grab and go with elementary for breakfast or for lunch? And I see a few hands raised. So hold on for 1 second. Let me toggle over to that screen to see who was first. And it is 10:41. I realize that we're beyond our time. So I just want to be respectful of your time. If you have to go, it's okay. Oh, sorry, having some user error difficulties here. Hold on. Okay, well, I see 3 hands raised. So John, you want to go? And then Chris, you want to go after that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I think Chris brought up some very good points about the logistics and explained the dynamic of how Stanbaugh incorporated a lunch. I believe it was, or was it breakfast? It was breakfast in the classroom. So one of the things that I think, or I'd like for us to consider is, I think if we give options, I don't want to eliminate certain options, because at a school site, they can become very creative as a staff and come up with procedures and ways to do things that might end up being a model for other schools. So I think if we give, I don't want to eliminate an opportunity or an option right out of the, as a recommendation. I think we need to make recommendations that have a number of options for lunch, so that we can create at least a framework of options for schools to consider, so that they have some ability to work on what kind of configuration fits their school and dynamic best within the guidelines that we set.
Okay, thank you. Shane or Chris and Larry, go ahead. Sorry.
If we are going to look at this seriously, I have 2 thoughts in mind. One, we cannot have kiosks that they come to. The staff would have to deliver it to the classroom. Our point is to try to keep them as social distance as possible. So if they're having to get into a line out in the hallway in order to go pick up their lunch and come back to their particular classroom, it's a waste of time to get them all out there, and it's going to make it impossible for the social distancing. So if we're going to look at this legitimately, the staff needs to just come into the room, hand out, move to the next room, and so on and so forth, just going down the hallway. The second thing that I have is a concern that we also need to take into consideration is our teacher staff. Our teacher staff uses typically the restroom during this period of time, and we're asking them to now go another 30 minutes without a restroom break, or possibly even the rest of the day. So are we going to be working in how are we going to do a restroom rotation, so to speak, for those teachers now who no longer have a duty-free lunch, no longer have the availability to do things that they need to do because they've lost this ability?
Okay. I'll respond soon. Larry, I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, that there is still some concerns about the classroom. Our pest control people, when we were feeding in the classroom, we had an abundance of a lot more calls. Let's face it, kids are not always really particular about where their food goes or how they manage it while they're eating. And we had a lot more calls for, ants, rodents, stuff in our classrooms that we don't normally get. So them work orders actually went up when we were feeding in the classroom. So it's just because, there's no way we can clean the classroom after every lunch. It was always at the end of the day. The teachers, they did the best they could to try to make sure that the trash was minimal, but let's face it, these are kids. They're not going to do that. And we've experienced it in the past. That's why I'm bringing it up. We did have to have more pest control and stuff done at our schools, while at the schools we were feeding in the classroom. I think it's still a great idea, and I'm willing to talk with you, Tedra, about my bus drivers and all, because I mean, I don't want to see anybody to end up not having a full day's work. Let's put it that way, whether it's what their goldenrod is or whatever. I would need to talk to my vice president for bus drivers and get with you on that. But I have no problem really giving them time to still be able to earn their paycheck, by helping out at schools and delivering food to classrooms, even if it becomes a monitoring the classroom. So like Chris was saying, the teacher needs to go to the bathroom or something. If that bus driver stayed in the classroom until the teacher got back or something. I'm willing to work with you. I mean, this is different times and we need to do different things, but I just want to make sure everything is out there. There will be an extra cost, because I'm telling you, if we do it at every school and every classroom, the custodial staff has enough to keep up with now, and they're not going to be able to go in after each lunch and clean a classroom. It's not going to be as easy as it sounds. Oh, they come in and sweep up or something like that. It doesn't work that way. There's more things they have to do. And like I said, our pest control people saw a lot more work orders. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind. But I'm willing to work with you, Tedra, to see what we can do to help my staff out that I represent, and to also help out the kids in this district. That's all I have.
Thank you, Larry. I really appreciate that. So I'll talk with you offline specifically about what we need. Sarah Fortney, your hand is raised, and then Chris, your hand is still raised. Do you have another comment?
Rob pretty much answered my question. So basically, I'm trying to get this, wrap my head around it. Our drivers in attendance earn a minimum of 5 hours pay per day. Is that correct, Rob?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So would it be financially feasible to pay them 8 hours a day to come into our school sites and be those folks that we need to contribute? I mean, I agree with everything John Hill said, Larry, etc. But to me, that seems like a solution, possibly. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
I would agree with you, Ms. Fortney. If we have the flexibility in which Larry has said we do, I think that may be something that we would look at. We'd obviously have to look at the costs, but to Chris's point, we don't want to, again, to my point earlier, rather, we don't want to overwhelm anyone, right? And so including our teachers.
Right.
And so if I would like to try as much as we can to still give them, a lunch break and a bathroom break and everything. And so this is where those kind of glitches come in terms of figuring that out and having the administrator on site figure that out.
Right.
Or even developing like maybe a schedule, and maybe we get 5 extra bus drivers that are just there that can be floats, or maybe it's 10 extra bus drivers that are floats. And maybe, with their last drop off, if it's at Citrus Ridge, then they're at Citrus Ridge for the day and they float and they help, the teachers do
Right.
whatever they need to do. They help with lunch, so maybe they're delivering lunch, and then after they deliver lunches, then they go back to the teacher's class, or they stay in the teacher's class and then relieve the teacher for her 20 or his 20 or 30-minute break, and then go from there. Does that make sense? I think we just have
absolutely.
to
And I actually, I'm old school, and I think we used to do stuff like that. Like, Victor, you may remember, we're both old as dirt.
Yeah, yes, well, okay, I definitely am, but I think that part of the issue will come down to the size of the school too. I know, like at China Lakes, having one person try to cover the number of teachers on the grade level would be a little more challenging, but it's something that can be worked out in the school. You may use other personnel too. And Tedra, you mentioned paras. Not all schools have a lot of paras, but we can certainly look at how we use them. We do have coaching personnel. We have other personnel that in times like this we could use to just create a schedule, because teachers, like, I totally agree, teachers need to have a bit of a break. And as a secondary teacher, that's kind of how we did that. We would team up too. and schools come up with their own solutions, but I think having a bus attendant could staying would be a huge help. If they could be part of the schedule, that would be something that would be floating. Then it would be something that would be more of a schedule. Then they could be worked around based on if they were safe. I think it were ill and out, that you have all the plans set. I think that we're gonna have to have all of those on deck and having all the other personnel, also bus attendants, helping out with that. And I think that the schools could come up with a feasible schedule. It'll look different at each school based on size. That's just my opinion.
Tetra, you're muted.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and start making some decisions. What's currently on the table, we're talking about lunch duty or lunches. And so it's multi-pronged. So first, we are okay, or how do we feel overall about just grab and go lunches? Not necessarily going into the cafeteria as much, because remember, we're trying to reduce movement. And so let's think about just grab and go as a whole. We'll work out the logistical piece of it in terms of people getting breaks and making sure that all of our staff has a break. But I just want to make sure, are we okay to do grab and go breakfast as well, Ms. Fortney? I agree. So grab and go breakfast and lunch, just grab and go food. Are we okay with that? If you agree, go ahead and just write agreed. If you disagree, put your note as to why you disagree in the chat box. And remember, this is grab and go breakfast and lunch. And as Rob said, that will include some hot lunch. And so we'll have, so our recommendation from this group is a grab and go hot lunch, or I'm sorry, grab and go lunch and breakfast, okay? And so the next one is, what about, so that means that we can do maybe classroom dining where we can, or if we can. What about having a combination of both classroom and like hallway dining, right? And I know that, again, logistically, I see your eyes, Chris. Thank you for that. But so let's say we know that when we're eating, we're not going to have our masks on, right? And so it may be more important at that time to really do socially distance. So if we're in the classroom and our classroom is not that, if our classrooms are not that big, then what if we have like half in the classroom and maybe half in the hallway? And it's just an option. I'm just trying to think in terms of how we would have some flexibility. Thank you, John, in terms of dining options. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the hallway, but I just think we need to think about it. Or even, what about outside, right? It's hot, but what about outside? What if we even think about outside? So I see Chris has his hand up. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, if you have a school that has outdoor hallways, you've got the problem of rainy day as the first thing that pops into mind. For the classroom, or for the schools that you have a hallway, if you're going to put a whole bunch of kids into a hallway to be eating, the classrooms that are around that are trying to continue to do their class work are suddenly going to become massively distracted with the huge amount of noise that's going to be coming from the hallways. And it's going to completely disrupt the instruction that's going on. The only way that you could possibly be worked around that is if you have the entire hallway eating lunch at the same time. But then if you're having the entire hallway eating lunch at the same time, that's defeating the point of the social distancing and having everyone sitting in the hallway. Right.
Okay. What about if we try to utilize maybe a combination of then the cafeteria and classrooms as well? What if we do some cafeterias? Some classrooms are maybe like on an A-B schedule. So every other classroom is utilized. Classrooms that are not eating lunch, in classrooms where you're not eating lunch, you're then in the cafeteria. Do we like that idea? And then with the classrooms where they are eating lunch, then they can utilize the other empty classrooms to social distance and then eat lunch. What about that?
I like that.
April said, giving schools options like traffic planning, partial cafeteria use, eating outside, and classroom eating all on the table. Oh, I like that. Good. Thank you, April. Administrators can work with their school teams to devise a plan. So do we like all of those options? Just, I guess maybe what I need is an agreed to all of those options. So all of those options would be partial cafeteria use, eating outside, maybe eating in the hallways where feasible, if it's not raining, as Chris has mentioned, and utilizing other spaces. Oh, Shane, Chris, yes, you have a question?
If we're going to be looking at the cafeteria and classrooms, it again is going to be a huge endeavor with our custodial staff, because now they're not just doing one or the other, they're being expected to do both. And if you have a group of students that's going to come through into the cafeteria, sit down and eat their lunch, between each of those groups that come in, you're going to have to be doing a thorough clean of the chairs that the kids have just been sitting in, the tables they've just been sitting in, because the COVID virus can live on plastic for up to 3 days, on linoleum for up to 5 days. So if you've got a group of kids coming in, you've got to have a complete thorough clean in between each one of those groups.
I would agree with that. And as I said earlier, I think that is, it's imperative, it would be imperative for us to fully staff our custodians and make sure that they have what they need, the department, to adequately clean the buildings. And that would be also, as April has said, we could use transportation staff to help with the cleaning issues. And so all options are on the table. Okay, well, I appreciate that. So, each school is different and should develop their own. So Art said each school is different and should develop their own plan for eating. We agree. Again, these are just recommendations. And so from our group, overall, it's just a recommendation. And then Mr. Hill said agreed to all options or combination of options that work best for individual schools. We agree. Okay, so I appreciate that, everyone. And so it is now 11 o'clock. It's up to you in terms of what you all still want to do. We do have two other areas that are that will likely be hot topic areas. One is when students and staff participate in extracurricular activities, and the other is when students and staff leave campus. I do see a question from Sarah Fortney. Sarah?
I just wanted to piggyback off John Hill's suggestion on the traffic plan. Maybe we could have an eating plan from the sites as well.
Oh, good idea. I like it. I like the terminology. So an eating plan and a traffic plan. Good, thank you. Okay, so we can end it now. We do have another call on Wednesday at 9:15 or probably 9 o'clock. We do have a infectious disease pediatrician coming to speak with us. I'm assuming her presentation will likely be about 30 minutes. And then from there, we could go ahead and get another meeting started. Are you all okay with Wednesday's meeting? And then us flushing out the final two issues on Wednesday? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Ms. Porteous?
Hold on for 1 second. I have two things going on. So Chris just said he has another hot topic to add. And then someone just said Mrs. Porteous.
This is Sheila. I said, Ms. Porteous, could you
Okay.
let us know what the other two topics would be so we could be thinking about solutions by Wednesday?
Oh, I can email those to you, but I'll tell them to you as well. So the first one is when students and staff participate in extracurricular activities. So think about our clubs, our sports, etc. What are we doing with those just overall? What is our recommendation? And just think about that. And then two is when students and staff leave campus, how will they leave campus? And what I'll do as well is I'll share with the group some of the things that I looked at this weekend. One was from North Carolina, and I want to say the other was from New York. But I'll send those two articles to you so you all can just review them and read them in your own leisure. And maybe we can have a robust conversation on Wednesday about extracurriculars and exiting campus. Okay, and Chris, you said you had something else, another hot topic?
I put it in the chat. It's going to be, what is the magic number? What is going to be the deciding number of when we're going to shut down a school based on COVID cases that show up in that school? District office, apparently the magic number was 3. So what is going to be the magic number at a school?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we did shut down temporarily. The district did shut down temporarily. We did have, and it was really more so in an abundance of caution, just to do some deep cleaning, etc. I know that previously in other districts, so let's take Palm Beach, for example, it was just one student. When that one student was on campus, they shut the campus down and they brought in and did a massive deep cleaning of that campus. That was earlier on in the pandemic. And so I think that would really be based on some best practices. But at this point, I think we just have to look at that and see, what that number is. But I don't believe it will be a high number at all. I can't imagine it being over, probably 2 or 3, because we want to ensure that every other student is safe and our staff is safe. So I can't imagine it being exceedingly high. And I think largely it depends on the exposure as well, meaning if that one student was in one classroom all day, and then, if we can go in and contain it, or if it is not contained at all, if that student was all around campus and then possibly spreading the virus around campus, that's something that we have to think about as well. So we'll get back to you on that, Chris, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
If I could add to that question.
Certainly.
At what will we have guidance of an example? Students on campus, on my campus in particular, has been identified with COVID. That would be very pertinent information for many of our parents whose children are medically fragile to know. So are we going to have guidance of how or who we let know those issues happen? Because I think that's going to be a very important piece of information. We're going to have to know what we can say, how to say it, and so forth.
Agreed. So one of the things that I know that we will come out with is almost like an operational guide for administrators and for school-based leaders to review. And so here are the list of things that must be done when you know that someone has or is positive on your campus. And so that operational guide, I think, will be very, very helpful for for staff, April. But I know that we're putting that together, and that will likely come out soon for you all. Mrs. Fortney, you have a question or comment?
Yes, which I think that's a valuable point by both the last 2 speakers, which I think is why we need that third option of e-learning that is tied directly to classrooms, so that kids can move and staff can move back and forth between brick and mortar and continue instruction. That's just my 2 cents. And it needs to look the same in the classroom, because it is no humanly possible way for a classroom teacher to do both e-learning and in-person learning that looks different, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. So to address the other questions, is Dan Talbot here? So Dan Talbot, who is the director of athletics for the district, he is in our group. So I'll make sure, I don't see him now, but I'll make sure that he is present and ready to speak and comment based on our next topic of conversation. And then remember, the last thing that we need to discuss is when students and staff leave campus. So let's start thinking about that, and let's start thinking about how we can, or what recommendations we want to make as a group to the whole entire group about how students and staff leave campus. All right, any other questions or comments before we exit this meeting? I see something in the chat box, hold on. Can someone read it?
Ms. Porty, can you just remind all to hang up when we exit?
Oh, thank you. Yes. And particularly, this meeting is recorded. Are we not supposed to be meeting with a full task force on Wednesday? Yes, I think so. So again, join the 9 o'clock meeting at first, and then we'll go to our subgroup after the 9 o'clock meeting, okay? So do the reopening task force and then do the health and safety after that. And this meeting is recorded, so please make sure that you actually hit the red button and hang up, because what happens is if you don't hang up, it continues to record, okay? So thank you so much. I'll see you all on Wednesday. You all be safe and take care. Have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.